The town of Nkwum had never seen such excitement before. For weeks, people had talked about nothing else but the wedding of Arins, the son of one of the wealthiest families in the region. From the moment the date was announced, the air was filled with anticipation. The roads leading to the family compound were swept clean every morning, and traders set up stalls, hoping to sell food and clothes to the many guests expected. Women stitched their best outfits, men polished their shoes, and children rehearsed dances they would perform on that special day. The compound itself was transformed into a palace of colors. Long canopies stretched wide, chairs lined up neatly, and drummers sat ready with their talking drums and flutes. Guests arrived in cars that glittered under the sun, their laughter and chatter mixing with the sound of traditional music. But behind all the joy, something else lingered. Every invitation had been carefully selected, every guest chosen by the family with pride and precision. Not everyone was welcome, and people whispered about those whose names were left out. While Arins prepared to step into a new chapter of life, the stage was also being set for a story the town would never forget. Obianuju was not a woman who liked to draw attention to herself. She carried herself with quiet grace, the kind of presence that did not need loud words or flashy clothes to be noticed. People remembered her kindness, her patience, and the way she always spoke with respect, even when others mocked her. Years ago, she had been close to Arin's family. She knew the compound like the back of her hand, and many times she had been treated like a daughter within those walls. But when wealth and pride grew thicker in the hearts of some, they began to see her as too ordinary, too unimportant to stand among them. Slowly, her place at the family's side was erased, and those who once smiled at her began to whisper behind her back. When the wedding invitations were sent out, people noticed her name missing. Some shook their heads in silence while others laughed openly. "Why should she be invited?" they said. "She is nothing compared to the families coming for this wedding." Still, Obianuju did not argue or beg. She carried her pain quietly, walking through the town with her head lifted, though her heart felt heavy. Children still ran to greet her, and neighbors spoke warmly to her. But she knew that in the grand celebration of Nkwum, she was no longer counted among the worthy. Deep inside, however, Obianuju's spirit was unshaken. She believed that life had its way of revealing truths, no matter how long it took. She had no riches to offer, no power to command, but she carried something greater, dignity and a heart that had never wished anyone harm. What no one knew was that behind her calm eyes rested a secret, a connection that would change everything. For now she remained in the shadows of gossip, a woman erased from the guest list, yet holding a piece of destiny that the proud would soon bow to. Would you like me to continue the same expanded storytelling style for each of the 15 outlines, so by the end you'll have the full 4,000-word script? The morning of the wedding was bright and full of life. Music floated through the air, women's laughter echoed across the streets, and the compound of Arin's family shone like a festival ground. Guests dressed in sparkling lace and rich fabrics walked proudly through the gates, welcomed warmly by the guards. But when Obianuju arrived, the story was different. She wore a gown that was simple yet breathtaking, woven with care, fitting her with grace. Her head tie was neatly tied, her steps calm, her face glowing with quiet dignity. Yet the moment she approached the gate, the guards crossed their arms and blocked her path. "Madam, your name is not on the list," one of them said firmly. His eyes shifted nervously as though he knew who she was, but had been warned not to show her any respect. Obianuju stood still, trying to explain. "I am not here to cause trouble. I came to witness a union of joy," she said softly. But the guards shook their heads, repeating the same line. "No entry. We are only following orders." As other guests walked past her, their eyes turned to watch. Some whispered, some laughed openly. A group of women from the bride's side sneered, their words sharp enough to cut through her calm. "See her. She actually thought she could sit among us. Look at the gown she's wearing. Does she not know this wedding is for the wealthy?" Their laughter rang out as if her pain was their entertainment. Obianuju's chest tightened, but she refused to bow her head. She stood there at the gate, her dignity intact, though her heart ached from the sting of humiliation. The guards shifted uneasily, yet still barred her way. In that moment she realized she was not only being denied a seat at the wedding, but also denied her worth in front of the entire town. Still, she whispered to herself, "One day truth will walk with me." What she carried in her heart was bigger than their mockery. And the day was not over yet. The wedding compound sparkled with colors, music, and excitement, but at the gate stood a scene that cut through all the beauty. Obianuju, dressed in her simple but elegant gown, remained calm even as humiliation pressed hard on her spirit. Around her, guests passed by in shining attires, their perfumes filling the air, their laughter echoing into the compound. But some women from the bride's side decided her pain was their entertainment. They gathered just a few steps away, their voices loud enough for everyone to hear. "She doesn't belong here," one of them sneered, her lips curling with pride. Another shook her head and laughed. "Look at her. Who invited her? She has no place among people like us. Imagine standing at the gate as if she matters." Their words spread quickly, and soon others joined in the mockery, pretending to pity her but clearly enjoying the moment. "Maybe she came to beg for food," another whispered, her laughter sharp and cruel. Each insult fell like stones, but Obianuju did not flinch. She stood tall, her head held high, her hands gently clasped in front of her. To the onlookers it might have seemed she was ignoring the women, but inside her heart was burning. She remembered the years she had spent being close to this family, remembered the times she had walked into this compound without being questioned, and now here she was, treated like a stranger, mocked like she was nothing. Some guests looked on in silence, their faces uneasy. A few shook their heads, uncomfortable with the cruelty, but no one spoke up. To them, it was easier to stay quiet than to challenge the rich and powerful. But Obianuju's silence was not weakness, it was strength. With every insult thrown at her, she whispered in her heart, "Dignity is not given by men, it is carried within." She knew the very people laughing now would soon swallow their words. For fate was already turning, and the truth she carried was greater than their mockery. "Would you like me to now count?" Weeks before the wedding, when the whole town was busy with preparations and gossip, Obianuju had crossed paths with a man who seemed out of place in Nkwum. He was tall but walked with the weight of sorrow on his shoulders. His clothes were worn, his face carried scars that told of hardship, and his eyes looked like they had seen more pain than joy. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that made her stop and listen. His name was Kenechukwu. At first, he spoke little about himself, but as days passed, his story slowly poured out like a wound finally opening. He told her how he had grown up far from the town, hidden away after a bitter family dispute. He was only a child when he was taken, and he grew up believing he was unwanted, forgotten, erased. Life in exile had not been kind. He had known hunger, loneliness, and the cruelty of strangers. But one thing had never left him: the memory of his mother's lullabies and the name of his father's family. That name was the same one that now rang loudly across Nkwum. The family preparing for the wedding of Arins. Obianuju's heart had trembled as she listened. This man, broken but alive, was no ordinary stranger. He was the lost brother of the groom, a bloodline denied, a son erased from history. The scars he carried were not just on his skin, but in his soul. As he told his story, she felt both pain and purpose rise within her. She could have walked away, left him in silence, but something in her spirit refused. She promised him that one day he would not remain hidden. She promised him that the family that forgot him would see him again. Now, as the rich mocked her at the gate, no one knew the secret she carried. They saw only a woman humiliated, but beside her heart was a truth powerful enough to shake the foundations of the wedding. Obianuju was not empty-handed. She was carrying the missing piece of destiny. Would you like me to go ahead and write section 6? The groom's lost brother, 350 words. In the essay, Kenechukwa's story was one the family of Arins never spoke about. Long ago, when land disputes tore villages apart, he had been caught in the storm. He was just a little boy when angry hands carried him away, hidden from sight so that his presence would no longer threaten the wealth and inheritance of others. The elders who should have protected him chose instead to silence his existence, telling the world he had died. From that moment, his name was washed away from family songs, and his face erased from memory. But Kenechukwa lived. He grew up far from Nkwum, in a place where no one knew his roots. He learned to survive through hunger and loneliness, working for strangers who never showed him love. The scars on his body came from years of hardship, but the deeper wounds were inside, believing that he had no family, no place, no worth. Many times he had asked himself why he was born, why life had given him such pain, but still he kept walking, carrying his broken heart from one day to the next. When Obianuju met him, it was as if the universe had written their meeting in the stars. She saw through the scars, through the silence, and recognized something powerful in him. The way he spoke, the names he remembered, the stories he carried. They matched the family she once knew so well. Piece by piece she realized who he was. The lost son, the brother of Arins, the child everyone believed was gone forever. Her heart shook at the truth, but instead of fear, she felt courage. Looking into his tired eyes, she made a promise. "You will not remain forgotten," she told him. "The family that cast you aside will one day face you again, and the whole town will know your name." Kenechukwa's hands trembled when he heard those words, for no one had ever spoken to him with such faith. For the first time in years he felt alive again. And Obianuju, the woman the family had mocked and erased, became the one to carry him back to his rightful place. Do you want me to continue with? The wedding of Arins had reached its highest moment. The drums beat like thunder, dancers spun in circles with joy, and the air was heavy with music, perfume, and laughter. The bride's family glowed with pride, showing off their wealth and elegance, while Arin's family moved among the guests like royalty. Everyone was caught up in the celebration, until the sound of feet and silence changed everything. From the gate, Obianuju stepped forward. The guards who once blocked her path stood frozen, too stunned to act. Her steps were calm, steady, and filled with a quiet fire. But this time she did not walk alone. Beside her was Kenechukwu, the man with scars of exile, his eyes sharp yet filled with fear and strength all at once. His presence was heavy, almost sacred, like a ghost stepping back into life. The drummers slowed, their hands pausing against the skins of their drums. The dancers stopped mid-step, their colorful wrappers swaying in the air. Whispers spread quickly like fire in dry grass. Who is that man? Where did he come from? The crowd parted without anyone telling them to, creating a path as if destiny itself demanded it. Obianuju's chin was lifted high, her gown catching the light of the sun. Kenechukwa's face, though lined with pain and age, carried the undeniable mark of blood. The older men and women in the crowd leaned forward, their eyes widening. Some gasped, others covered their mouths in disbelief. A few even stumbled back, clutching their wrappers and shaking their heads. The music had stopped completely now. The wedding that was meant to be a display of pride had turned into a stage of revelation. The man no one expected to see had arrived, and he was not alone. He came with the woman the family had mocked, the very one they tried to erase. Together, they walked into the heart of the celebration, their steps rewriting the story of the day. "Would you like me to carry the same style into Section 8? Gasps across Nkwum, 350 words? The silence that fell over the compound was thick, broken only by the sharp gasps of those who knew the truth. At first, the younger guests whispered in confusion, not understanding the weight of what they were seeing. But among the elders, men who had lived through the disputes of years past, recognition struck like lightning. One by one, their mouths opened, their eyes widened, and their hands trembled. "It cannot be. Kenechukwu?" one of them muttered, his voice shaking as if a ghost had walked into the wedding. Another old man clutched his staff tightly and whispered, "This is the lost son. The blood of this family has returned." The crowd erupted with cries. Some women screamed in disbelief, others pressed their palms to their chests as if their hearts would leap out. The young ones stared wide-eyed, looking from Kenechukwa's scarred face to the elders who confirmed his identity. Rumors spread across the compound in seconds. "It's him, the boy they said died. He has come back," until the entire town seemed to be roaring with shock. And then in the center of it all stood Arins. The groom, dressed in his royal agbada, froze where he was. His smile vanished, his body stiffened, and his eyes locked on the man walking beside Obianuju. His mind raced back to childhood, to faint memories of playing with a brother whose laughter had once filled the compound. He remembered the day the boy disappeared, how the elders told him his brother was gone forever. Yet now here he was alive, standing tall with pain etched into his face. Arin's lips parted, but no words came out. His chest rose and fell heavily, his heart pounding like the drums that had suddenly gone quiet. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them back, too stunned to move. Around him, the wedding no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a stage where hidden truths had been forced into the light. "Would you like me to move on and write Section 9? The collapse of pride 350 words. In the same day, the moment Kenechukwa's face was recognized, the celebration lost its shine. What had been laughter and music turned into whispers and uneasy glances. The bride's family, who had walked proudly just minutes before, suddenly looked restless. Their jewels and bright lace could no longer hide their fear. They had come to show off their wealth, to shine in the eyes of the town. But now the spotlight had shifted. All eyes were no longer on the bride or her people. They were on Obianuju and the scarred man she had brought with her. Whispers grew louder, spreading like a storm. The lost son has returned. This woman is the one who brought him. People began pointing, their voices filled with awe and shock. The bride's relatives exchanged nervous looks, their smiles breaking apart. They knew the power of such a revelation. A wedding that was supposed to prove their strength and pride was turning into a public stage of disgrace. The elders who had ordered Obianuju to be denied a seat could no longer sit with pride. Their hands shook as they clutched their walking sticks, their eyes darting around the crowd. Some tried to stand and speak, but their voices cracked. The authority they once commanded seemed to vanish in a single moment. It was as though their robes of honor had been stripped away before the whole town. Guests who had laughed at Obianuju earlier now avoided her gaze, shame burning on their faces. The women who mocked her gown fell into silence, their heads bowed, their words swallowed. Nobody dared laugh anymore. The power had shifted completely. The bride herself sat frozen, her hands trembling as she gripped her wrapper tightly. She glanced at her parents, searching for answers, but they looked just as shaken. Pride, once shining like gold in the compound, was collapsing into dust. The very people who thought they held control now stood trembling before the truth. Obianuju, once Arins had stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, staring at the man he once thought he had lost forever. Memories of childhood games, shared meals, and laughter long buried began to return like waves crashing against his heart. Suddenly, the weight of years, the silence, and the lies of the elders came upon him all at once. His strong shoulders, built to carry respect and pride, trembled under the truth. In front of everyone, Arin's knees gave way, and he dropped to the ground. Gasps rose from the crowd, for never had they seen the proud son of this wealthy family kneel before anyone. But this was no act of shame. It was an act of love and grief. Tears streamed down his face, falling onto the dust beneath him. His voice cracked as he whispered, "My brother, my blood." The world seemed to stop as Arins reached out, his arms wrapping tightly around Kenechukwu. Kenechukwu stiffened at first, his body still carrying years of rejection and pain. But the warmth of his brother's embrace broke through the walls he had built to survive. Slowly, his own arms lifted and held Arins close, as though clinging to a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. The two brothers shook in each other's arms, their tears soaking into each other's clothes. The crowd erupted, clapping, shouting, and even wailing as if the entire town had been waiting for this reunion. Old women beat their chests and cried out, "Chinik, the dead has returned." Some of the men raised their hands to the sky, blessing the moment as destiny fulfilled. The compound was no longer a wedding ground. It had become a sacred space of truth and reconciliation. Even those who had mocked Obianuju earlier were now wiping their tears, ashamed of their laughter. The power of blood, the bond of family, had silenced every voice of pride. And at the center of it all was Arins, no longer the proud groom, but a broken son who had found his brother again in the most unexpected way. Shall I continue with section? The compound was still echoing with the cries and claps of the crowd when one of the elders, his voice trembling, finally spoke. How did this happen? Who brought him back? His question hung heavy in the air, but everyone already knew where the answer would point. Slowly, almost as if guided by one spirit, all eyes turned toward Obianuju. She stood a few steps away, her gown glowing under the sun, her face calm, her posture tall. She had been mocked, denied, and humiliated at the very gate, yet now the entire compound waited for her to speak. Obianuju did not rush. She let the silence breathe, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, the same people who had whispered, laughed, and tried to erase her. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice was soft but strong, carrying far across the compound. "When you mocked me," she said, her words piercing like arrows, "I was busy bringing back your blood." The crowd erupted again, this time not with mockery but with shock and awe. Some gasped aloud, some covered their mouths, while others bowed their heads in shame. The elders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their authority crumbling as her words exposed their blindness. The very woman they had pushed aside had done what none of them had the courage or heart to do. Obianuju went on, her tone still gentle, yet unshakable. While you counted me unworthy, I found the brother you buried in silence. While you laughed at me, I carried him back to you. And now he stands here, not as a stranger, but as your son, your brother, your blood. Tears welled up in the eyes of many. Some women who had mocked her earlier began wiping their faces quietly, ashamed of their cruelty. Even the bride, shaken and speechless, could not look her way. Obianuju's dignity shone brighter than any jewel in the compound. She had turned humiliation into honor, and in that moment her name was no longer one of scorn. It was a name spoken with respect. Do you want me to continue with section 12D? The bride's relatives, who only moments earlier had stood tall and proud, suddenly found themselves shrinking under the weight of shame. These were the same women who had laughed the loudest when Obianuju was stopped at the gate, the same men who had whispered that she was too ordinary to belong in such a grand gathering. But now the truth stood before them like a mirror they could not escape. Their pride, polished and shiny at the start of the day, was now scattered in the dust. Some of them tried to avoid her gaze, staring at the ground as if it could swallow them. Others shifted uncomfortably in their expensive wrappers and head ties, wishing they could undo their cruel words. The women who had mocked her gown pressed their lips together, their laughter swallowed by silence. The men who had smirked at her humiliation now clenched their jaws, their faces burning with embarrassment. For the entire town had seen everything. There was no hiding, no pretending. Whispers spread through the crowd, sharp and unkind, but this time not toward Obianuju. So these are the ones who mocked her, someone said. See how the proud are brought low. Another voice added. She stood with dignity, and they drowned in arrogance. Now look at them. The sting of those whispers pierced deeper than any insult, for the people of Nkwum would not forget quickly. The bride herself sat in silence, her eyes cast down. She had watched her family laugh at Obianuju, had smiled when the guards turned her away, but now she felt exposed. All the gold on her wrists and the jewels in her hair could not cover the shame pressing on her chest. And Obianuju? She did not gloat, she did not mock them in return. She stood with quiet strength, her calmness making their shame even heavier. It was clear to everyone. The ones who tried to erase her had erased themselves instead. Their laughter had turned to silence, and their pride had turned into ashes before the eyes of the town. Shall I continue with SE? Slowly, as if guided by an unseen hand, Obianuju was invited into the compound. The same gate that had once been slammed in her face now opened wide, and this time the guards who denied her stepped aside with their heads lowered in shame. People watched in silence, their eyes following her every move as she walked with steady steps, her gown flowing gently in the breeze. There was no mocking laughter anymore, no whispers of rejection. All that remained was respect, raw, undeniable respect. She was not taken to the back where ordinary guests sat, nor to the side where neighbors were placed. Instead, she was led straight to the front table, the very place of honor beside the family who had once erased her. The drums, which had been silent, began to beat softly again. Not for the bride, not for the groom, but as if in tribute to her walk of dignity. Every beat echoed her triumph. As she sat down, a hush fell across the crowd. No one dared to question it. The same women who once sneered at her now avoided her gaze, their heads bowed low. The elders, who had trembled under the weight of their guilt, dared not speak. Even the bride's relatives kept still, their pride swallowed by the power of truth. At the table, Obianuju did not carry herself with arrogance. She did not smirk or look down on anyone. She sat with the same calm dignity she had carried all along, her eyes soft, her hands resting gently on her lap. But the sight of her in that seat spoke louder than any words. She was no longer the woman mocked outside the gate. She was the woman whose courage had brought honor to the family and turned shame into wisdom. The people of Nkwum looked on, and in their hearts they knew they were witnessing history. Obianuju had been denied a seat, but now she sat in the place reserved for the highest. And this time not a single soul dared to whisper against her. Would you like me to continue with section 14? The town's whispering 350 words? In the same style? That night Nkwum could not sleep. From the marketplace to the narrow streets, from the palm wine stalls to the courtyards, One story echoed on every tongue. It was the story of Obianuju, the woman who had been humiliated at the gate, mocked, and treated as though she was nothing. Yet, she walked in carrying the very piece of destiny that the proud family had been missing all along. People spoke with wide eyes, their voices carrying both wonder and shame. Mothers repeated her name to their daughters, warning them never to let pride blind them to another woman's worth. Fathers shook their heads, saying, "This is why you must never mock the quiet ones, because you never know what they carry." In every corner the tale grew richer. Some said the drums stopped when she entered. Others swore they saw the groom's tears shine like jewels under the moon. Children, who had overheard their parents talking, whispered to one another in excitement, "Did you hear? She brought back his brother from the shadows." Every version carried the same heartbeat, the truth that Obianuju's dignity had crushed the arrogance of the mighty. The town's women, who once laughed behind her back, could not walk proudly anymore. At the water wells their voices trembled as they told the story, trying to hide their shame. The elders, once quick to erase her name, now repeated it with respect, as though it had always been sacred. And the bride's family, who had once believed their wealth and beauty made them untouchable, sat in silence, knowing their arrogance had been burned away before the whole world. By dawn Nkwum had changed. No one saw Obianuju the same way again. She was no longer the rejected guest. She was the woman whose strength brought a lost son home, whose calmness shamed the arrogant, whose presence reminded everyone that destiny does not bow to wealth or pride. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become the song of the town, a lesson carried in every heart. Do you want me to, Emo? In the days that followed, Obianuju's story refused to fade. It was carried in songs sung by children, in proverbs spoken by elders, and in the quiet lessons mothers passed on to their daughters. Her name became more than just a memory. It became a warning, a reminder, and a crown of honor. People said, "Never deny a seat to the humble, for they may arrive carrying the crown of your family." Those words spread beyond Nkwum, traveling to neighboring towns until they became a proverb etched into the hearts of many. Obianuju had walked into that wedding with nothing but dignity, and yet she left with a legacy greater than gold. Where others had tried to shame her, she answered with grace. Where arrogance tried to erase her, destiny lifted her higher. The same gates that once refused her had opened for her with honor, and the same voices that mocked her now sang her praise. Her story became the kind that grandmothers told under the moonlight, their voices trembling with emotion as they reminded the young never to mock the quiet or despise the lowly. Obianuju's pain had not destroyed her. It had carved her into a symbol of strength. Her dignity turned into her weapon, her patience into her crown. And long after the drums of that wedding grew silent, her name continued to echo, forever etched as a lesson that pride will always fall, but true honor will rise. Do you want me to stitch all 15 parts into one seamless 4,000-word viral-style story for you?